Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Shed Organics Show. My name is Jordan. Today my guest is Cass from Plant with Cass, and she is a terrarium expert. She's very interested in what it takes to build one of these beautiful ecosystems inside a glass container. And now recently she was actually on Michael's podcast, The Gardener's Lodge. I was also a guest on the show. Fabulous podcast. You should definitely go and check it out. But Michael went through with Cass all the basics of what a terrarium is, how you might think about the plant selection, the medium in which you're growing, and also the environment where to place it, how to think about where it goes in your home and the care of a terrarium. So some of those interesting but basic sort of elements are really important to understand. So I highly suggest you go and check out that episode. Michael's done a fantastic job of facilitating that conversation. And there are some really interesting points that you may or may not hear in this discussion. So I'll link that down in the description below. So go and check that out, maybe prior to this episode. There may be a little bit of crossover, but for the most part, I tried my best to try and work around what she's already been thoroughly discussing on her workshops and all of the things that she does on social media. So go and follow her, check her out. The links are in the description for Cass and everything that she does. So you can go and follow along and find out much more about how to build your own fabulous terrarium at home. So without further ado, let's go straight into this conversation. Here is Cass from Plant with Cass.
Yeah, so with a closed lid terrarium, what we're essentially trying to think about is the ecosystem. How is the ecosystem going to work in a closed lid terrarium? It's obviously very different from an open terrarium because there is some type of ecosystem in an open terrarium, but it's not a complete ecosystem. So with a closed lid terrarium, it's really all about thinking about the plants. The types of plants that go into a closed lid terrarium are very different to an open terrarium. I do get asked, can I put succulents in a closed lid terrarium? No, you cannot put
No.
succulents in a closed lid terrarium. They're very different plants. They live in very different environments. So it's really important around the choices of plants that you put in a closed lid terrarium. I have found as well that I do need to think about, in terms of a closed lid terrarium and the plants, some plants thrive very well in a closed lid terrarium and some plants thrive good in an open terrarium, but may not. The plants that thrive in an open terrarium may not necessarily thrive well in a closed lid terrarium.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to really think about that when you are making a closed lid terrarium. And I have learnt that through sort of my own testing with terrariums and closed lid terrariums, what plants work, what plants don't work. And that's sort of what I then bring into my workshops and explain in my workshops as well around the plants. And then, I go into springtails. So we put bugs in the terrariums. And that obviously helps the environment. The springtails have a job in the closed lid terrarium as well. And yeah.
That's really good. That kind of gives me an idea because immediately you've differentiated between closed and open lid. And my first thought when you were talking about plants and choosing plants is that a closed lid system would have much higher humidity, right? So
Correct.
we're thinking greenhouse style where like you might have all your seeds and things in sometimes in little humidity domes and things like this, what we might do for the garden, because you want that increased humidity, you want some of that moisture in the air. And then, you're getting that moisture evaporation that's hitting the roof, hitting the edges of it, coming back down, and then watering the system again and kind of having that full enclosed loop. Whereas the open one, it's basically a pot of some sort, right? Where you've got an open lid. So all of the environment around us dictates what plants would work well in there.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I've got this. Oh, I want to read you this. This is really interesting. So you've probably heard this because you're all over terrariums and you know exactly what's going on. So there's this guy, right, who I found out about a while ago called David Latimer. I'm going to read off this
Yes.
screed, and you would have heard of him. In the 60s, right, he plants, this is for my listeners who haven't heard this. He planted a few seedlings in a big glass bottle, added a small amount of water, sealed it, and put it under his stairs in the UK. Um, it went on to be completely self-sustaining, this ecosystem, and he only opened it once in 1972, so that's maybe like 12 years later, to add a tiny bit more water. And then after that, it's been sealed for decades, and he's not opened it, and it's self-perpetuating and continuously, moving around and just doing its thing within there. Uh, to me, like that's a fascinating story in itself. The fact that it's been a terrarium for 50 years. And I think, let me have a look. I think the main plant in here is a spiderwort plant,
Yes. Yeah.
something like that. Tradescantia, is that right? Um,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
so he's got that plant in there, but it's kept going for that long, which is just incredible. And when we look at outside into the real world, something that I'm really big on is mimicking nature, mimicking natural cycles, looking at our ecosystems out there in the world to then recreate. That must be such a scientific job, right? Tell me about the way in which you would observe what nature does and then bring that into the terrarium that you're building, closed lid, should we say?
Yep. So I guess the way that I look at it, and observing nature, observing our own world
Yeah.
and ecosystem that we live in, and then bringing that into a closed terrarium. And something that I explain in my workshops is that you've really got to think about keeping the lid on. A lot of
Yeah.
people, they want to take the lid off and, oh, should I water it once a week? And I'm like, don't water it once a week. Don't take the lid off. And I basically explain when you need to take the lid off, when you need to water it. And what I explain is that you need to think of it as basically the world that we live in. And they talk about the ozone layer and the hole in the ozone layer and how that's actually changed our weather cycle and how that's changing our weather cycle. And I explain that by taking your lid on and off all the time, it's a very similar concept to the hole in the ozone layer, because the environment doesn't know how it's meant to be living, because you're taking the lid on and off, giving it water, don't giving it there's no it can't create any cycle, and then
Mm.
everything just starts dying in the closed lid terrarium, because it's like, I don't know what world I'm meant to be living in.
Yeah, we're
And
playing God in a way, aren't we? We're coming in and just going, it's going to
yeah,
rain now, or you're going to change the humidity and all of that.
exactly. And that's sort of something that I observe in nature, and how I explain that and bring that into closed lid terrariums, especially when I'm talking about when to take the lid on and off, how often to take the lid on and off, why it's important to keep the lid on, because then the environment starts to understand how everything should be growing in there, and it creates its own ecosystem. And we
Mm.
only need to give it a little bit of a helping hand every now and then with a little bit of water, just like how our gardens need some rain.
Yeah.
And that's basically how I bring, and how I think about our environment and our ecosystem, and how I bring that into a closed lid terrarium.
Yeah, it's basically like our world, but in a bottle and, or a glass bowl with a lid. And you said you have to add a little bit of water, but this guy is David has only watered it once in 12 years in, and then not since. That to me says that it's adapted to what that environment is in there. It's understood it, as you said. It's like become accustomed to the humidity levels, the oxygen well, actually oxygen, yeah, oxygen levels, because it's self giving
Yes,
itself oxygen and carbon dioxide. And
correct.
then it's reusing that moisture. It's literally the definition of sustainable in terms of water saving and all of that kind of thing. Um, what do you think, like, how do you think people can get it to that point where they can literally not touch it? Or is it a little bit at the start, a little bit of fiddling around until you get it to that right sort of place with the plant selection, to then let it do its thing? Or are we sort of just, throwing it in and just watching and observing?
So I guess in the beginning, it does come down to, what plants you put into the terrarium. There is a slight, there is a little bit of maintenance in the beginning, but then as the ecosystem develops, it really starts looking after itself. And the bigger that the terrarium, the bigger that you make the terrarium, like whether it's tanks, whether it's just, a bigger glass vessel, the more plants inside, the less you actually need to water the terrarium. So the
Wow.
smaller the terrarium, the more you or more frequently you might need to give it a little bit of water. When I say give it water, I mean a few sprays. Don't
Yeah.
start. I tell people don't start pouring water in there. You're just gonna kill it. And basically, and as I said, so the bigger the terrarium, the more plants are in there, the more oxygen and carbon dioxide and moisture that
Mm.
it's creating, the less you have to water it. So I made a terrarium more than 2 years ago now. It's quite a decent size, and it sits on my buffet. And I kid you not, in the two more than no, no, it's probably coming close to 3 years now that I've had this terrarium. It'll be 3 years in December. I have watered it maybe 4 times.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
over the
That's really
space
good.
of almost 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And
And that's
then,
because of the size too.
right. Yeah. Because that's what I was just going to touch on. So the plants themselves, obviously within the selection that that you go for, there's so many plants that you can select as well.
Yeah,
They obviously would be humid loving plants. They really
correct.
enjoy that. Um, Tell me a little bit about the water cycle within that, within like how the plants are using that water and how the overwatering, like you said, the pouring of water in there. What are we doing? Are we drowning the plant when that happens?
Yeah, so basically, when you're pouring water in, you are effectively drowning the plant or the
Yeah.
plants because there's nowhere for the water to escape. There's no holes at the bottom of the glass for the water to escape in. It's a closed lid room. It can't evaporate into the atmosphere. So you can't really be pouring water in because you can pour too much
Hmm.
and then it just oversaturates. The roots get soggy and everything just starts dying. And I've had quite
Mm.
a few people that have actually brought terrariums back to me to remake them because they have said, I think I watered it a little bit too much. And I'm just like, okay, that's
Yeah.
fine. And then they learn. And then I give it back to them. And then, the second time, and they're like, it's fine. I'm doing exactly as you've said. And sometimes these people haven't bought the terrariums from me.
Hmm.
They've bought
Yeah.
them externally and then they've basically brought them to me and said, can you remake it?
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
So, just touching on that, then the when you're water, like, so for me as a big soil person, and like this is the part that I'm really interested in getting in with you, is choosing the right medium to have your plants in obviously is kind of crucial, right? And then this goes in hand with this drowning of the plant. So if you have a soil or a medium that does get waterlogged easy and it doesn't allow the gas exchange that we want in a good soil with that carbon dioxide and oxygen flowing inside and outside, you're then stifling that. You're then going to stop the plants from having that natural transpiration of oxygen and carbon dioxide that's symbiotically joined to the soil. And ultimately, the whole thing will be falling apart, right? So, can you go through soil for me? And is it soil that we're using? And what are we actually trying to create in terms of a medium that sustains itself in that manner?
yeah. So like you've mentioned, the soil is really important in a closed lid terrarium. It has to be nice and airy. It has to be loose soil. It can't be soil like that is going to clump
Hmm.
together and hold together because then there's nowhere for the water to escape. The roots just get waterlogged, and then everything just dies in the terrarium.
Yeah.
So the soil is very important. I actually mix my own soil up
Beautiful.
for the closed lid terrarium. So I've got all these different elements that go in. I was mixing it by hand when I first started my business almost 4 years ago. About a year and a half in, I was like, I'm getting too busy. I can't mix all this soil by hand.
Hmm.
So then I ended up buying a cement mixer to
Perfect.
mix all the soil and just chuck all the components in. So yes, I guess the components are very important
Hmm.
when it comes to a closed lid terrarium, making sure it's nice and airy, making sure that some of the components are still a little bit water retentive, but also as well, I also add nutrients in there to the soil, to help the plants sort of
Hmm.
thrive and grow as
Yeah,
well.
perfect, perfect. So just quickly, on that again, that the soil that we choose has to be, or the medium that we choose, because you're putting together your own one, has to be a good quality. So if, when I'm talking about it, I talk about some sort of aeration component, so
Yeah,
something that's going to allow some sort of drainage through it. I talk about like a base water retentive style component, which you might use cocoa or peat or something like
yeah,
this, some sort of
yeah,
moss, which is usually often really good. And then I've got my, say, compost as my third part, which is a lot of the organic matter. It's got the life in it, and then it's also going to be feeding that plant long term. Now, when I talk about soil in terms of our garden beds, our pots, and all of these types of things, I'm thinking about how we, again, observing nature, have this mulch layer that gets created on the top of the soil. So from falling leaves, dead insects, things like this, become this mulch layer. And then that's basically being broken down by the life in the soil and turned into nutrients. So that's how nature self-sustains itself. Have you seen that in terrariums? Is that something that you can do or achieve? Presumably, this guy David did this by having his plant just feed itself. Um,
yeah.
have you seen that? Is it possible?
Look, when it comes to, I guess, dead leaves falling into a terrarium on the soil, what can happen is the leaves can mold over
Yes. Mm.
because it's a closed lid system. The leaves can actually mold, and then it then creates mold through the terrarium because it's so high humidity, and again, there's nowhere for the moisture to escape.
Yeah.
So I always encourage people with their terrariums, if they've got dead leaves, whether they're yellow and dead and they haven't fallen off or they have fallen off, to actually take them out of the terrariums.
Right.
Um, Although in saying that, depending on how many springtails are in the terrarium, they do come along and start eating at the dead, decaying leaves, which is
Sure.
obviously their purpose.
Hmm.
So they do help in the terrarium as well, which is great.
Yeah.
And that's why I put them into all of my terrariums that I make, and also in the workshops. I allow people to put them into their terrariums as well that they make and take home.
Yeah, cool. Because that's adding in a little bit of life that's helping do some jobs for you. That's not
Yeah.
necessarily, it takes away some of that maintenance and that kind of thing. I'm really interested how that works then. Obviously, so, and, sorry for trying to pick your brain on a nerdy part of the soil. So just do what you can. Yes, when you've got it down and there's this high humidity level, I can totally see how it would get a little bit yeah, fungal dominant. It starts to really kind of go a little bit moldy. That's what you're trying to avoid as well, because then that stifles the soil. There's no oxygen carbon dioxide exchange again. So then, in terms of feeding your terrariums, are you putting this in as part of your spray watering? Are we adding in a liquid? Are we just prepping the soil so it's got enough for a long-term project? What's sort of the feeding schedule for your terrariums?
So, yeah, so it's quite interesting. I do get this question asked quite a bit in my workshops. And because of what I put in the soil, it doesn't necessarily need any feeding
Hmm.
once the terrariums are made.
Yeah.
So I don't encourage people to feed the terrariums with any type of liquid or fertilizers. It can then, I guess, ruin the balance
Hmm.
that the terrarium is making as well inside that closed ecosystem. When I make the terrariums that I sell or custom terrariums, before they go out to the customers, I do spray them with a special spray
Hmm.
that actually comes from Japan.
Wow.
So basically, this special spray does give a little bit of nutrients to the plants and the moss that's inside, and then that should be enough
Hmm.
for when people take them home. But in the workshops, I don't spray the terrariums, and they're fine. Like, I've had people come back to me, a few years later, and that have done my workshop, 2, 3 years ago, and have said, my terrarium is thriving. And they've come back for a second, third workshop to make a different, glass
That's
jar.
brilliant. Yeah.
So, yeah, so really, there is no feeding when it comes
Okay.
to the terrariums.
That's super interesting because obviously it's sorting itself out. It's like reusing what it is. And also like the cycle of the nutrients within that enclosed system also you get those again as well. So like the plant will grow bigger. Some of it will drop, the minuscule bits. Obviously, you can take away some of the stuff so that you can monitor it so it's not getting too moldy. But some of it will drop, feed the soil. But you're also getting, that water cycle, which is carrying a lot of it as well. So you would never add any compost, any worm castings, or anything like this into the soil layer. Say if what happens if it was like 10 years old? Do you think that there might be a place for it down the track or not so much?
Look, there may be a place for it down the track. At the moment, I don't have any terrariums that are 10 years old. So
Yeah.
I guess, my
Yeah.
terrarium that is 3 years old, it's still going strong. And
Hmm.
I do monitor it. I look at it every day, and I barely even touch it. And it's just
It's
thriving.
thriving. That's perfect.
So, yeah.
I, I
And obviously, in my soil, I put worm castings through the actual soil
yes.
mix itself. So,
Cool. So you've got all that nutrition in there. It
yeah.
just really interests me. And then I can imagine after, say you got a 10-year terrarium, I would be so petrified changing anything about it because it would just like you got this thing that's grown for so long and then you don't want to ruin it. It would just it would be a
Exactly.
nightmare. Um that's super interesting about that. Okay, so then gosh, this has got my mind really going about all of this kind of thing. I love the idea because the idea of a self-sustaining ecosystem is just something that we take for granted, I think, in the real world. And then the science of having to put it all together inside a bottle is just bizarre to me, but it works. It works so well. So there's a couple other factors that we haven't really mentioned. Um, one of them being lighting, right? I presume because it's a closed system, the air inside will heat up very quickly. So direct sunlight, especially for a lot of these tropical plants, will be a no-no.
Yep.
So what sort of lighting are we needing? Some supplemental lighting? Are we needing just a nice sort of dimly lit spot in your house? What are you suggesting for lighting?
So, yeah, so you are correct. Direct lighting, direct sunlight onto a terrarium is a big no-no.
Yeah.
It heats up the terrarium, it sweats, and everything just dies
Yeah.
because it just heats up too much. So basically, what I say when it comes to closed lid terrariums is indoors. They must be kept indoors. People have asked me, can I put them on my undercover veranda outside? No, there's too many weather elements out there.
Hmm.
So indoors, usually in a medium to brightly lit space without putting it in direct sunlight. And I always tell people to avoid putting it on a windowsill or
Hmm.
right up against a window, because again, the heat then ricochets off the window glass onto the terrarium and still creates a problem when it comes to heat in the
Yeah.
terrarium, because there's nowhere for the heat to escape to.
True. Yeah, you want consistency, don't you? And in
Yeah.
terms of like, well, at least consistency in your environment because big fluctuations will just cause even more stress inside there. Um,
Yep.
and what about like moving it around your house? So if you've got it in one spot and you do a bit of a reno or you do a bit of a move house or something, are you looking to try and recreate the spot as quick as well as possible if it's been thriving? Because I presume changing it all the time again is going to throw a spanner in the works, possibly.
Yeah, look, it could throw a spanner in the works when you are sort of moving it around in different environments. But you want to look for something quite similar in terms of lighting to where if you're going to move it. So if you're moving it to sort of a medium to brightly lit space, that's fine. But I wouldn't be, having it sit for a year or two in a medium lit
Yeah.
area and then you go and put it in a low light space because
Yeah.
it's going to be like, oh, where's all my light gone? So
Yeah.
and look, and and if you do have, or you live in an apartment or you live in a house that doesn't get a lot of light and a lot of your spaces are quite dark, you can supplement it with
Mm.
other lighting as well, like with just a small grow light. You can put sort of in the space or over the top of the terrarium, but you don't want to have that grow light on any more than sort of 6 hours or so.
Yeah.
Say
Yeah. Fair.
6 hours is probably the max. And that's what I do with a lot of my terrariums that I make and sell because I need space to put them all
Yeah.
on shelves. So I've got shelving organized with all grow lights sort of under the shelving, and then they
Beautiful.
all the terrariums are sort of lined up, and that's sort of how I keep them going until sort of a customer comes to pick it
Yeah,
up. So
perfect. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean all of this comes down to just observation, really. Being able to understand like, hey, um just like with any plant, you've just got to watch how it's doing and
yeah,
and monitor it and kind of just treat it nicely. You don't want to intervene too quickly, I suppose, as well. I want to talk about the other thing that I wanted to touch on is the plant selection a little bit more. Now, again, I'm aware that you have covered this plenty of times before, but I want to talk about succession. And what I mean by succession is that you might plant some plants in there. Some are taller than others. Some are going to be bushing out. We've also got the moss under there as well. That is such a crucial part. Presumably filtering some of the water and all of this, cleaning it. So when you're thinking about plant selection in that way, how far into the future are you thinking about what those plants will look like?
yeah, it's quite interesting because I have sort of tested different types of plants over the years that I've been making terrariums, which is quite a long time now. Uh, you know, I would say probably I've been making terrariums for about 8 years.
Cool.
So I was making them before I even started the business.
Yeah.
So and I guess that's how I learnt about what types of plants to put in, what they're going to look like once they
Mm,
actually grow in the terrarium. You know, there could be a plant that really looks nice in the beginning, and then as it grows, it starts to look quite leggy or
mm,
thin as it's growing, and then it sort of doesn't look very nice. So you then need to trim it down. So yeah, so you do think about it a little bit, but
mm.
in saying that, yeah, I guess so. I'm just really trying to think about it. I guess
That's okay.
yeah, it's just I do think about the types of plants that I'm actually going to buy and they're actually going to look like in the terrarium at the beginning and then as they grow. And then with the plants as well as they grow, you need to make sure that when you trim them back, they're then going to look still nice once they're trimmed back.
Mm,
So you need to think about all of this when I'm selecting what plants I offer in closed lid terrariums or in my workshops. It is quite important because you could have some plants that they grow really tall and thin. So you've got this really thin, long stem, and then the leaves are up here, and then they're touching the lid, and then you're like, oh, but I need to trim it because it's touching the lid, and then you cut it off, and then you just got a stalk.
yes, exactly. Yeah, I can totally imagine.
So
And the reason that I say that is because, as you just said, a plant that you put in could grow and fill that space. What that's then doing with an increased canopy size, more leaves, all of this, it's blocking more light. It's creating probably, slightly more humidity in certain areas of it. It might be then providing a better environment for a plant underneath to fill that space.
Yeah.
Is there room over the course of a terrarium, say if you've got one for, a fair few years, is there room to kind of watch that happen and then go, okay, there's this little gap there. I might go and fill that with a little plant that might just sort of fill out underneath that section, or let's try and build a little bit more moss around there. Is there room for that as you go?
Yeah, I think there is, depending on what plants you've actually used in your closed lid terrarium. There can be some room later on down the track to add
Mm.
to your terrariums. Yeah,
But no, mostly you're going to be trying to, when you set it up, you want to set it up for the long term, right? So that
pretty
you're
much.
essentially not going to be touching it. Because I'm bringing this gardening mindset into like this kind of set and forget thing.
Yep.
Um, so then, yeah, is there? Hey guys, really quickly, jumping in, I just want to remind you, if you are not subscribed to this show, that is the number one thing that you can do to show me your support. So if you're finding value from this conversation and you're deeply engaged, I would love you to hit the follow or subscribe button. All right, back to the show. In terms of the plants that you're choosing, um, can you go through a couple that you do like that you want to use, and then I want to touch on moss separately. So we'll just do that the other plants first. What are some of the ones that you go to for that?
Yeah, sure. So my ultimate go-to that I tell everyone when they come to my workshops are photonias.
Ah.
So photonias are one of the best plants that you can put in a terrarium. They come in a variety of different colors. And even when I run the workshops, I have a range of different colors of photonias, and people are just so excited because they're like, oh my god, there's just so much color. Like, do I go for pink? Do I go for red? Do I go
Yeah.
for green with a splash of pink? Like, it's just endless when it comes to photonias and the types of colors, and they're very hardy in plants, and when they grow in a terrarium, they don't just grow up, they tend to grow out as well, like a little
Oh,
bit. So they tend to start to spread a little bit. So I've got terrariums that I've got on my shelf that, are 2 years old. And I'm actually starting to trim them back and reuse those photonia cuttings to then replant them in other terrariums.
cool. I
Because
like
with
that.
photonias, you can also take cuttings. So for your listeners that don't know, that you've got a node, which is the thicker part, so you're basically cutting just above the node, just below the node.
Yeah.
Then you can replant that into sort of another terrarium, and then the roots, in a month or so, will just start slowly growing, and then they're just great. Photonias are just great.
That's
So they're
brilliant.
probably my go-to plant
Yeah, okay.
for a
And
terrarium.
like you said, when you're replanting them in there, anytime I've ever cloned anything, it requires a lot of humidity. So it's perfect. You're just sitting it in the soil and it's like a perfect little cloning station. So it's just going to do really, really well. Um,
Yep.
any others that you go to before we touch on moss?
I do sort of look at some of the pothos range, but the
Mhm.
small sort of the snow queen pothos I use quite a bit in some of my larger terrariums because they look quite nice. There's a bit more space,
Yeah,
and once they start growing, they look quite nice. As well as like your pillias, because they can sort of grow
yeah,
long and grow like a little bit of a vine, depending on what type of pillar you're putting in. So they're quite good as well. They're probably more of my go-tos, and also the button fern. Button
oh,
ferns are
cool.
quite nice in terrariums as well. They can though start to grow a little bit leggy sometimes, and then you just sort of just trim the tops off. But it doesn't matter if you trim the tops off; they still look sort of nice
Yeah,
down the
okay.
bottom. So
I
yeah,
imagine the legginess, for the most part, would come from lighting differences. Um,
yeah,
that's just my guess. But then, yeah, so you're choosing all of these plants, and it does get dictated by the size of the terrarium, obviously, because you've got to use fewer or more plants, or you can go for something that's going to be a little bit bigger if you've got a bigger space, and that makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
Um, let's talk about moss then. So moss seems to be included quite a lot in terrariums. Do you have any idea as to why that is, and what other qualities of moss, or what are some of the good things that moss brings into a terrarium?
So with moss, it does make the terrarium look like part of nature. So you're
Yeah,
really, again, bringing in that green and that nature feel into a terrarium. So it
yes,
just feels like this mini world
it does.
inside a glass jar that you've just, put on your coffee table, for example, and it just brightens up the space. So it just brings that natural element into the terrarium, but also as well with the moss, it does create a little bit of humidity in
Hmm.
there as well. And, rather than just putting all rocks in there. So it's just plants and rocks, which is still quite nice. Yeah, the moss brings some level of humidity into the terrarium as well.
Yeah, and like what I know about moss is that it's a very good filtration system. So the moisture that goes through the moss will get cleaned out. So it's going to help a lot with the cleaning of it. Obviously, you're gonna have a lot of life in that soil medium, in the water, and all of these types of things that are again helping to combat your fungal spores, things like this that are going to create problems. And it's a good ground cover, so it's kind of keeping the moisture at the right sort of level in the ground. It can use some of it if it needs to. And I really love the contrast, as you say, of that beautiful green. Um,
Yeah.
is the moss one of the hardest parts about it, or is it an easy part? Because I imagine growing moss is quite difficult.
Yes, so growing moss is quite difficult, I find.
Yeah, me
I
too.
have, yeah, I've attempted it and failed to
Yeah,
grow
it's
moss.
hard.
It is really, really hard because you have to have the right environment for moss to grow, and you have to have a really good setup, in your backyard or whatever space you have. You have to have a really good setup where water is basically constantly flowing
Hmm.
in that space. So it's really, really important that you have, a proper space set up to grow moss.
Yeah.
And, I may attempt it down the track when I have time. I haven't actually had the time
Oh, yeah.
to,
I'm busy.
to really invest and yeah, and really invest. And I would love to and really invest in, growing moss. But at the moment, I either, collect it myself, obviously not from national parks,
Yeah.
from other sort of waterways or streams, or if I'm falling short, then I do order from a moss
Cool.
supplier as well. So,
Yeah, beautiful. I reckon it's just such a integral part of these types of systems. And it seems to be used quite a lot, which is really cool because it is an underappreciated plant or organism. I'm not even sure what you'd go
yeah,
across of the two.
yeah,
That brings a lot to the ecosystem itself. So that one's really cool. The next question I have, I'm sorry if I'm jumping a little bit all over the place,
yeah, that's fine.
is the container itself, right? Can you just can you use just about anything? Does the shape of it matter? I've seen so many of them obviously are in bowls, like what would be like a fish bowl with the lid. Does the shape of it matter? Apart from the only thing that I can think of is the fact of where the water condensates.
So the shape doesn't matter so much.
Cool.
What matters is the lid that you're using, the clarity of the glass. So the
Mm,
clarity of the glass actually matters because if your glass is, frosty or it's like bubbly, the way the light's coming through, it's going to
true.
filter that light coming through. So it's not going to be the same light. So the clarity of the glass is important, and it can't be like a dimply glass
Mm,
or anything like that. So the shape doesn't matter so much, but the lid. So the lids are really important, and this is something else that I speak about to customers. Is that I always say to steer away from timber lids, bamboo lids, they mold. So
hmm.
regardless, I've tried everything from painting, the lid with a clear, mold repellent lacquer, it will still eventually mold because of the moisture, the high humidity. So I always tell, customers, glass lid, cork lid. You can use Perspex lids as well, especially with a lot of those fish bowls. People use Perspex lids, although each lid will work differently with the
Hmm.
ecosystem. So if you're using a glass lid, the terrarium holds the moisture in a lot better.
Right.
Whereas if you're using a cork lid, the cork is porous. So
Mm.
water can evaporate a bit quicker through a cork lid. Still works, but anything with a cork lid may need a little bit more frequent watering than a glass lid. Glass really holds the moisture in. Then you've got your Perspex lids. They're not too bad as well, the Perspex lids. And again, with the Perspex lid, it depends on, does the lid fit over and just past, the shape
Mm.
of the bowl? Because
Yeah.
if it doesn't and it's too small and it doesn't sort of sit nicely and you've got like a gap, then again, air's getting through. So you're going to potentially have to water it a little bit more.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. The actual sealing of the environment is so important because that is the number one probably thing that you're trying to control in this instance because everything else is doing its own job within there. Like you said, you can only just come in, do a little trim here and there, a little bit of top up of a couple of sprays. But for the most part, if you have a little bit of a gap in there or something like this, and you're just going to be, butting your head up against the wall most of the time. Um,
Yep.
this is really, really good information. In terms of, I want to then bring it now to your role as a facilitator in workshops, and educating people. I've heard a little bit about your story, and I really love your story. And again, I'm going to be pointing people over so that they can go and hear a little bit of that on Michael's podcast on the Gardener's Lodge. But in terms of your experience now working with people, what do you think it is about terrariums that really fascinate people? What do you think it is that brings so much joy out of when they see one or when they can create one? I think there's just something special about them that people seem to just absolutely love, and me included.
Yeah. So I guess with a lot of the people that come through the workshops, they just want something that's easy to care for.
Mm,
Not much maintenance. They can go away on holidays and not have to worry, and then come back and it's still alive. Maybe their house plants are, slowly withering away because they
yes.
haven't had water. But the terrarium can literally just thrive with
Mm,
very minimal care. So people are looking for easy to care for plants they can sort of just set and forget. Also, as well, people like that sort of that feeling of bringing nature inside.
hmm.
So some people that come through my workshops, they are basically creating or trying to mimic, a rainforest or, something that they've seen on a bushwalk, for
Yeah.
example. So they try and sort of, I guess, mimic that in a sense. And yeah, and bringing that then indoors into their space.
Yeah, they're getting a piece of the outdoors and kind of getting to watch it unfold in front of them. It's like having a nice window into a nice natural backyard, but really it's just right there on your coffee table or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
what about kids? Do you have a lot of kids come through?
I have a few kids that come through, probably not as much as the adults. I
Of
do
course, yeah.
run some, kids workshops here and there. I probably run more adult workshops, I'd say, than kids, but I'm looking to run a little bit more kids workshops next year.
Cool.
So that is the plan. And I guess the kids that have come through the workshops, they've loved it. To
I'm
them, it's
sure.
like, making, I guess, yeah, something from nature, making it in a jar. It's fun, it's getting involved, especially the older kids. I guess it's learning about or putting into practice what they've learned in class about
Yeah.
ecosystems and about plants. And so they find that fun. And then you've got sort of the little kids that just enjoy just to make something. And to them, because when you're making terrariums, you're using all these really long tools, and kids are like, oh, it's like the game Operation that we play. so, so
So
then there's
true.
that fun element for the younger ones as well.
Yeah, definitely. And they can get involved in and design it too. Like that, as you said earlier, there's so many different colors and things you can put in
Yeah.
your terrarium. I presume a lot of the fun for you is that creative aspect of being able to make something look really beautiful. Is that hold true for you?
Yeah, I believe so. I really love, I guess that's why I love creating terrariums, is sort of making something beautiful that someone can, take home or even give as a gift. And, people are like, oh, wow, this is just amazing. Like, this looks beautiful. And as much as, as a gift, you can give, flowers, they're going to die eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So with a terrarium, I guess that's what I get, and the enjoyment that I get is that people can take it home or give it as a gift, and it will stay alive for years to come. And yeah, and it's also relaxing as well. Like, I find making terrariums quite relaxing, especially when it's not, when I'm not sort of churning out, the same terrariums, which is in my usual collection.
Yes.
But if someone comes to me and they're like, I want you to make a custom terrarium for either myself or a customer, and these are the colors that I want. You go forth and design it. I trust your design. And I'm like, great. I love it when people come to me and they're like, I just want these color elements. I trust your design. Go forth,
Yeah.
because then I'm really in my element. And an example of that was a couple of years ago for a wedding. So I had a customer come up to me and they wanted a big display terrarium for their wedding, at their wedding
Wow.
reception. So this was basically a large fish tank, and you can actually see it on my Instagram page. I have pictures from a couple of years ago on my Instagram page of this fish tank, and I had to actually design it on a design program first because it was so big. It
Wow.
was for a wedding. I'm like, I need to actually design this first on paper, or on a program, before I actually make it into a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically what I did for this really large size terrarium. And it was quite fun because they gave me a little bit of what they wanted. They wanted a bit of a rainforest, they wanted all moss, and just sort of elements of like big rocks, which I use dragonstone.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like really nice big rocks, with some nice sort of, I guess, tan brown colors in it. And yeah, and I really enjoyed making that terrarium. It was
That's
really
so
fun,
cool.
and the customers loved it, and they still have it as their, in their house, and they've kept it as a memento from their wedding. And they even
That's
put like a
amazing.
little trinket inside
For the wedding.
inside the terrarium from the wedding. So
Oh, now it makes me wish that we did that. I'm gonna go tell my wife we need to get married again. We got to build a terrarium. That's such a cool idea. But it's this memento that you can keep. It's a living memento of like, your whole marriage, your whole existence, and all of this moving on. That's really, really beautiful. And they've given you creative license. I totally understand what you mean by that because as a creative myself, like through music and things, I used to get a lot of people asking for specific things that I would then create for them. And it's so difficult when someone comes and they know what they think they want and they're trying to sort of force you into making, not necessarily force you, but like twist your arm into making that for them exactly how they want it. And they go, oh, but this, oh, but that. And it takes away all of your creative expression away from you. So when someone comes in with that trust and they go, yes, I love the kind of work that you do. Just do you, but like these are the kind of elements that we like, and then sprinkle a bit of that in as inspiration. Then you can really just let your creative juices go and like just go to town with it. Do you find that as well? Is that kind of hitting the nail on the head?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's very much so. It's the same for me.
Yeah, cool,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, it's just something that's like, in any creative element, you just really want to be able to express yourself and do your thing. And this is obviously a way in which you find that. So do you have any other cool stories about terrariums that you've come across before? Obviously, I referenced that one of this guy for 50 years that's done one and barely opened it. But any other ones that stick out as ones that you've made, ones that you've seen while traveling or, just heard about or anything like that? What are some of the things that really excite you about terrariums out there?
Yeah, so I guess one story that I can talk about is Japan.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, Japan is amazing. Like, I went to a place called Ada Lab, ADA Lab, and they're in Japan. They've got a few stores around Japan, and I first found it about 2 years ago, and it was just amazing. This store is amazing, and they, I guess, do fish tanks as well as sort of terrariums, and they also do what's called paludariums, which is a little bit more water inside the terrarium, and they're built a bit differently. Yeah, paludariums are a little bit different to a closed lid terrarium, but they're
Hmm.
still really cool. And just going into that space and that shop in Japan and having a look at how they actually create terrariums sort of started to give me ideas and inspiration of how I create terrariums.
Yeah.
And I've brought that knowledge back with me when I visited, and then only just this year I went back to Japan again,
Cool.
and I went back to the store because I'm like, I need to go back there. Like, it's just amazing. These Adalab stores and what they do is just absolutely amazing. How they create terrariums and 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 the plants that they use. So some of the plants that they use we can't get
Hmm.
here, which is very annoying because I'm just like,
Yeah.
can I just put you on a plane and take you
Yeah.
home with me? And you can't because of the biosecurity. But yeah, so if I always say to people, if you ever go to Japan and you really love plants and terrariums, or even want to get into paludariums, go to Adalab in Japan. They've got a few stores around, and you're just mesmerized by
I,
these stores.
I've seen you're absolutely right. The Japanese do things to this insane ability. Like they've just got this fine detail that's just incredible in so many things that they do. And my friend Steve actually has this really cool book that's from this Japanese guy, and it's all about, I'm gonna call it a fish tank terrarium.
Yeah,
I have no idea whether that's the right thing, but it's essentially basically fish tank styles, but they're all just plant ecosystems in there. Some with very minimal water, some full of water, obviously a complete aquatic like plant system. And the design, the attention to detail, some of the plants in there is just incredible. It looks just like a work of art, but it's this living thing. And I can imagine, yeah, going there, seeing all of that inspiration and just being like, oh my gosh, I want to come back and just do all of this to mine and create all of these different things. But it comes along with a science in terms of just how they've really thought about each plant's relationship with each other and, yeah, how it will progress over time and all of this type of thing. Um, it is a work of art when you're actually looking at it and you're just going like, oh my goodness, how is this even possible? One thing I did notice with those as well is that quite a few of them had like wood or log elements, like say like a piece of driftwood or something like
yep,
this.
yep.
What you said before with wood and things like this could potentially have that rotting feature. Do you ever use wood in your terrariums? Do you ever use wooden features? And is there anything to be careful of when we're thinking about that?
Yeah, so my display terrarium that I've spoken a few
Yes.
times about now, uh, that has wood inside,
Cool.
but you have to prepare it before you actually put it in a terrarium.
Oh.
So, and it's basically driftwood that I bought from an aquarium.
Mm-hmm.
What you actually have to do so it doesn't mold over, and I've tested this because I was like, when I first bought the driftwood, and I'd read about, oh, you need to pre-prepare, and this was like a few years ago, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna chuck it in there and see what happens. And sure enough, it just got this green mold all over it. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. So I had to pull it out. And anyway, so, and pretty much what I do now with any wood, driftwood, that you're going to actually put into a terrarium. One, if you're collecting it from your garden, they do recommend to pre-boil it
Right. Okay.
first to take out any impurities and
Hmm.
whatnot and bacteria that's in the wood that you may be then bringing into a fresh terrarium.
Very smart.
But when I buy the driftwood from the aquariums, I then have to still pre-prepare it. So I actually soak it in a bucket of water for about 2 weeks
Oh,
or
wow.
so. And what that actually does is it starts getting the wood used to being in, I guess, a high moisture environment, but you have to change the water almost every day.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then basically after the 2 weeks, I lay it out, I dry it, and then once it's fully dry, then I can start using it in terrariums.
Gosh, that's an amazing process. I didn't even think about that. I would have done exactly what you did and just whacked it straight in. I get the idea of this kind of quarantine or like getting rid of any pathogens or anything like that you don't want to bring in there. Um, this that leads nicely into sort of something that I want to touch on lastly is the introduction of the insects that you bring in. Um, so remind me which insects that you bring in there. You say lacewings?
Springtails.
Springtails, sorry. I don't know why I said lacewings,
Yes.
but yeah,
Yes.
so
No, that's okay.
springtails. Tell me about the springtails. Tell me also about anything else that people use in terms of introducing any life in there. Bugs, insects, whatever. Worms, I
Yep.
suppose.
Yep.
What else can we do?
So yeah, so I use springtails as I mentioned in all of my terrariums, and the reason for this is springtails are like janitors for your terrarium. So they basically keep it clean. They'll even go sort of crawling along, on the glass
Oh,
and
wow.
make sure they keep the glass clean as well. So they really are janitors for your terrarium, which is why they should go in all types of closed lid terrariums, not open because they're going to start climbing out. It has
Yeah.
to be a closed lid terrarium. And yeah, and I've actually got a blog on my website if anyone wants to read about
Yeah, cool.
springtails. So that is actually on my website. But also, as well, you can put isopods in
Hmm.
a terrarium. Although with isopods, there's a little bit more involved. They're not just like springtails where you can just pop them in and they'll do their magic and they're fine. Springtails, if you don't feed them, they will eat your plant leaves.
Whoa, okay.
So, and the ways you can feed them is sterilized leaf litter. So
Hmm.
you can put sterilized leaf litter into the terrarium, and that's their food source. So then they don't go and eat your actual living plants. Because I've actually had that happen with one customer. They wanted to put isopods in, and I said, "Look, that's fine." I ordered the isopods, and at the time, I wasn't very well versed on isopods. I knew about them, and I knew you could put them in closed lid terrariums, and I knew that they needed leaf litter to eat, but apart from that, I didn't know much more. And then that's how I started to research, and we figured out that the reason why all the leaves are disappearing is because the isopods have no food, so they're eating the leaves instead
Mm,
to keep going. So yeah, so there is a little bit more behind having isopods in your closed lid terrariums.
yeah.
Some people then also want to make terrariums for frogs.
Oh, yeah.
Um, Again, you need to make sure that the plants that you're putting in are safe for the frog. And that's, again, another different type of terrarium. And I always say to people, you can do it, but you need to research about the frog that you're putting in and make sure that the environment and the plants that you're putting in there is going to be safe for them, and the frog is going to be fine,
Yeah,
I guess.
totally. And even giving them like the amount of oxygen and whatever and air and all sorts of things. Like there's so much when there's living things in, well, I mean, they're all living things, but I just mean when you've got these larger living beings. And then this goes back to what you were saying earlier about the larger the container, the less, problems we're probably going to have, the more self-sustaining it is. You've got a bigger margin of error in terms of like, when you're getting the container size wrong. Um, That's cool. I like how that there's some living things in there. And I've seen ones with fish where you've kind of got this little, I don't know, sort of pond thing or like little dish of water where there's a couple of fish in it, and then the terrarium sort of built on the banks around that, things like
Yep,
that.
yep,
Again, all of these elements are adding complexity. So it's something that the environment then has to cope with. It's got to then change around and adapt to, and all of these types of things. So really, really cool though. Um, Tell me lastly, Cass, what's exciting you next about terrariums? What are you trying to look into to level up your terrarium game, and what do you think is the sort of the next few steps for you?
yeah. That's a hard one. I've got a lot sort of in my head that I'm looking at planning for next year. So I'm potentially looking at running online
Sweet.
workshops for
Yeah.
those people, that may follow me or come across me, and they live overseas or they live interstate, and basically running online
Like
workshops.
me,
So that's,
I would
yeah,
do one.
yeah, exactly. So that's sort of what I'm looking at for next year is possibly being able to run online workshops. But obviously, with that, I'd have to have a good setup. As you know, as a
Hmm.
podcaster, you
Yep.
need to have a good setup. So maybe I'll come to you for some tips on the
Yeah, of course.
setting up a room. But anyway, so that's sort of one, I guess, exciting thing when it comes to what I'm
Definitely.
looking at for next year. As I touched on before, I guess when it comes to my workshops itself, is running a few more kids workshops for next year,
Yep.
which will be exciting, especially for the local area. And yeah, and in terms of terrariums themselves, I think I want to attempt another tank terrarium.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, look at really putting my creativity into it, even thinking of doing maybe a Jurassic Park theme inside
Ooh.
this tank
Oh my
terrarium
gosh,
with
that's so cool.
dinosaurs and whatnot. So that's sort of been on my mind to do for a while. So there's a few things that are coming up, and yeah.
Beautiful, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening. I was thrilled to have Cass on. Like I said, I had heard her episode on Michael's podcast, and it was such a good introduction. I just had to go and ask all of these questions that someone like me, who's really interested in soil health, just absolutely needs to know. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. As I said earlier, go and check out the links in the description. If you didn't check out Michael's podcast, do so. It's really, really good. Also, go and follow Cass. She runs these incredible workshops. If you're a Sydney local, I highly suggest checking them out. You can go and learn how to build your own, and you can take one home and have this precious ecosystem that you've created to go and put somewhere beautiful in your home. And as she mentioned, you get this little piece of the outdoors, a little piece of nature that you can sort of sit and watch unfold in front of your very eyes. So I got a lot of inspiration out of this. I can't wait to build my own terrarium one day, and I'm sure you all did as well. Finally, from me, this is the final episode for the year that you will hear a guest. This is episode 49, so it's been a crazy year. We've nearly wrapped up 50 episodes, but next episode, I'm going to be taking you through a recap of the year. I'm going to pull out the highlights, my favorite parts of my favorite conversations, and I'm going to put them together in a little bit of compilation so that you get the absolute best of the best of this incredible first year of the Shed Organic Show podcast. I'm so grateful to everybody that's listened so far and is following along for the journey. Remember, follow along on your platform of choice because that really helps the show find more people, find a bigger audience, and get more people, as we know, inspired and empowered to get into the garden. So that's it from me. I'm very excited to see you on episode 50, but otherwise, take care and bye for now.